Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Shravanarotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Vede Ramayanishchaiva Purane Bharate Tata Adhavante Chamadhye Chari Sarvatra Diyate Mukam Karoti Vachalam Bhangum Nandayate Girim Yat Kripa Tamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Paramananda Madhava Paramananda He Madhava Kadunda Luchi Makaranda Se Makaranda Panakori Anande Bolo Hari Hari Harinka Name Vanda Vela Hari Kori Chakadola Se Chakadolanka Paraye Manamo Rahu Nirantare Manamo Nirantare Rahu Ha Krishna Boli Jiva Jao Ha Krishna Boli Jao Jiva Moti Dada Radha Dada Moti Dada Radha Dada Moti Dada Radha Dada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Hare Krishna. Good morning from Sridham Mayapur, the devotees. This morning we're going to speak something. Can you help me with this one? Get rid of it. Oh. This morning we're going to speak something about the wives of the Vedic Brahmins. Clear these things out for a moment. This is reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 29, Description of Pure Devotional Service by Lord Kapila Dev. We've been reading from text number 10, and this morning again we'll have some review of what we covered since we haven't been doing this every day. It's been, our last session was on Sunday. So, Karma nirharam udishya parasmin va tadarpanam yajed yastavyam itiva pritigbhava sasatvika. Translation: when a devotee worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead and offers the results of his activities in order to free himself from the inebrities of fruitive activities, his devotion is in the mode of goodness. Srila Prabhupada's purport, we're reading a little bit from it. He says the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras, along with the Brahmacharis, Grihastas, Vanaprasthas, and Sannyasis, are the members of the 8 divisions of Varnas and Ashrams, and they have their respective duties to perform for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna Kun, please help me. That's Deep Sis. I know, I guess he's here with the milk. When such activities are performed and the results are offered to the Supreme Lord, they are called karmarpanam. Duties performed for the satisfaction of the Lord. If there's any inebriety or fault, it is atoned for by this offering process. But if this offering process is in the mode of goodness rather than in pure devotion, then the interest is different. What are you trying to do? Trying to call him? Yeah, because he's waiting outside for the milk. He's waiting. You can call him back if you want.
I think you are checking the replies.
Krishna Kun. But if this offering process is in the mode of goodness rather than pure devotion, then the interest is different. The four ashrams and the four varnas act for some benefit in accordance with their personal interests. Therefore, such activities are in the mode of goodness. They cannot be counted in the category of pure devotion. Pure devotional service, as described by Rupa Goswami, is free from all material desires. Anya bilasita sunyam. There can be no excuse for a personal or material interest. Devotional activities should be transcendental to fruitive activities and empiric philosophical speculation. Pure devotional service is transcendental to all material qualities. Gora graganya ganagota goloruharam Goranga guritama gopyada kopa briksham Gopala gada ratidam yati singha gora Govinda deshi kambaram satatam namami Vanchakalpadarubhischa kripa sindhu bhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Brinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So in this verse, Lord Kapila Dev is describing that someone who's prityak bhava, who has a separatist or a separate desire from the Lord, a desire for himself, even though they look really good, they have some faith in bhakti, they're reading shastra, still that bhakti they're performing is called saguna, which means it's under the modes of material nature. It's not nirguna, or free from the modes of material nature. And in this case, this is sattvika bhakti, or bhakti in the mode of goodness. It's a very subtle topic. We've been speaking, this is our 5th session about this. I think we'll finish today. We've been speaking something from Brihanaradiya Purana, from the 15th chapter of the 1st canto, the conversation between Yamaraj and King Bhagirathi, where he describes 3 different types of sattvika bhaktas. Just to review, I'll touch on that. The first is called the Adama sattvika bhakta, or the lowest, and that's someone who's worshiping the Lord. They have faith in the Lord, but their purpose in worshiping the Lord is to destroy sin. And they're doing that for their own personal motivation. The Madhyama Sattvika Bhakta is someone who also has faith in serving the Lord, and he's doing it with the idea that this pleases the Lord. He's trying to consider something of the pleasure of the Lord. But still, he's considered to be a saguna bhakta, or a devotee under the modes of material nature, because he's prityak bhava, because he has a separate desire from the Lord. Although he's thinking of the Lord's desire, as we gave some examples, just like a con artist also may endeavor to learn what kind of food you like and what kind of music and different things you like, but his motivation is not for you. His motivation is for himself. So that's prityak bhava, and therefore that bhakti is considered to be saguna bhakti, or bhakti under the modes of material nature. The uttama sattvika bhakta is someone who has the attitude of being a servant, a das of the Lord. And he knows about Shastra, and he understands from Shastra that bhakti is the topmost topmost process. So that person is very, very good. How is that someone under the modes of material nature? It's a very subtle thing because again, he has pritag bhava. He has a separate desire. And although he's inspired by Shastra to become a servant of the Lord, and he surrenders to the Lord, at least to some extent, his desire is not the pleasure of the Lord. His desire is for his own benefit. And perhaps he wants to get liberation or whatever his motivation may be. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, I'd like to touch again on some of the points he makes in his commentary in this verse. He says that the Sattvika Bhakta worships the Lord with the intention of destroying his karma. And he performs the activities of hearing and chanting, but they're filled with his offering of occupational duties, with his performance of varna and ashram activities. And he confuses the two. He thinks that his worship is similar to his execution of ashram duties. Bhakti is a very, very subtle thing. If it's a very subtle thing to understand the heart of your girlfriend, or the heart of your husband, or the heart of your children, then what to speak to try to understand the heart of Krishna. And just as any person in this material world, they're not pleased when your motivation for a relationship with them is something selfish. So Krishna is also not going to be pleased with that. And such bhakti is described as sakama bhakti. It's bhakti which has some personal motivation. In the next verses, which we'll begin discussing on Friday, if all goes well, we'll hear something about nirguna bhakti, bhakti which is free from the modes of material nature, which is also known as Swarup Siddha Bhakti. So in this regard, as an example, we gave the Yajna Brahmins, who are certainly in the mode of goodness, who are great personalities, who were the leaders of the community in Braj, in the sense that they were Brahmins and they knew Shastra, they had faith in Shastra. Based on their faith in Shastra, they were performing Yajna for Yajna Bhuk, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But when Krishna sent his associates, the cowherd boys, to go to beg food from them, then those Brahmins who put the mode of goodness before their worship of Krishna, they didn't understand. And they criticized those boys. And they said, what is it? These are just Vaishyas. These boys are living in the forest. We're Brahmins, we're much higher. And we feed God. We don't just feed some young boys who are running around like this. And then we heard something about how Krishna told the boys, now you go to their wives. And the wives became very ecstatic and they went running to Krishna. And at that time, the Brahmins tried to stop them. Although they're trying to go to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, their husbands were saying, this is not religious. You can't do that. Your more important duty, they said, you can't go to Krishna because Rahibe Kula Dharma. If you do that, then you won't be a proper Dharma Patni. You won't be a proper wife in Vanashram Dharma, and that's the topmost thing. So this is exactly what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is explaining in his purport to this verse. They're misunderstanding, they're mixing up their mundane duties with transcendental duties. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, again, on this verse, he describes the attitude of the Yajna Vipras as being Vanashram Abhiman Janita, that they have this Abhiman, that I am doing this Vanashram Dharma. Although this Vanashram Dharma is something beneficial, although this is something Srila Prabhupada wanted, don't misunderstand it. Srila Prabhupada wanted this. Although he never said this in public, and although he never put it in writing, and I've marked some devotees have doubt about it, but privately he told Abhiram Prabhu that this Vanashram is 50% of my mission. Prabhupada felt very strongly about it. He wanted it to be established. So, but the problem is that when we become absorbed more in the Varnashram than in Bhakti, then it covers Bhakti. Or if we mix the two together and we think that my Bhakti is my Varnashram and my Varnashram is my Bhakti, then that's wrong. So we see in this case, the ladies, they were abandoning, they were doing the worst thing in Varnashram Dharma. They were leaving their husbands to go to another man. But they're considered to be the greatest devotees. So the fault of the Yajna Brahmins, Bhaktivinoda goes on to say, is Krishna prati odasinya. Odasinya means indifferent. They were indifferent to Krishna. And therefore, karma jadata, they were just doing some dull activities. We're supposed to do this, so we do it. We go out and we do this thing every day. They're not thinking about it. They're not doing it with any feeling. And in Krishna Samhita, Bhaktivinoda comments that these high caste Brahmins, they're only so-called followers of the Vedas because they can't realize the subtle purport of the Vedas. They're stuck in the mode of goodness. Their bhakti is saguna bhakti, and therefore they can't really understand Krishna. Bhaktivinoda says they follow the process of insignificant fruitive activities and they become materialistic. He says, or at the best, they study the science of self-realization and speculative knowledge and they become absorbed in impersonalism. Such Brahmins prefer to remain controlled by the scriptural injunctions or the previous ancestors by formally carrying out their instructions. They're unable to understand that attachment to the Lord is the primary purpose of all scriptures. So how can they become servant of Krishna? Bhaktivinoda says they're ass-like persons. They're formally carrying out the rules and regulations, but they're averse to Krishna. It's such a very, very important thing that we contemplate these topics. As we were speaking the other day, Vishwanath in his commentary in the 12th chapter of the Gita, he presents 3 different activities in bhakti: abhyasa, manana, and smarana. Abhyasa, Krishna says, abhyasa yoga yuktena, that you should practice. Abhyas means to practice. But they're doing it in an ass-like way. They're practicing bhakti, but they're not thinking about what they're doing. It's in the mode of goodness. And maybe they are thinking a little bit about the pleasure of Krishna, but they're not thinking deeply about it. They're thinking how Krishna will be pleased. Oh, Krishna will be pleased if I clean the temple, and then I'll get so much benefit. So the real focus is on their personal benefit, not on the desire or the pleasure of Guru and Krishna. Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Krishna Samhita, he says further that the ladies, the wives of those Brahmins, he describes, he says, Tesham Striya Sadagatya Sri Krishna Sadidimvane Akurvanatmadanam Vai Krishnaya Paramatmane. The wives of those ass-like Brahmins represent people who are subordinate to those with undeveloped faith. Now, this is a big, important part of our discussion today. Sometimes it so happens that there are people whose level of faith or level of sincerity is greater than the persons who are their managers or their leaders. Sometimes we see that the wife is a greater devotee than the husband, as we see in this pastime here. Or that the new bhakta may be a greater devotee than the bhakta leader or even than the temple president. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he describes this, and we want to explore this a little bit today through this pastime. And I want to just comment on one last thing from Krishna Samhita before we go more deeply into the pastime of the Yajna Brahmins. He says further that Etena dashitam tattvam jivanam samadarshanam Sri Krishna priti sampato jati buddha nakaranam. By this pastime, the equality of all living entities is ascertained. There's no consideration of caste or gender difference to please Krishna. Rather, when we have consciousness of those things, they sometimes become an obstacle in the development of love. And therefore, these Brahmins, they're thinking, we're big, big Brahmins, we're great devotees, we're worshiping the Lord, we know Shastra. And they were chastising their wives. You can't go to this boy in the forest. They didn't recognize Krishna. Although their whole life was engaged in worshiping Krishna, they couldn't recognize Krishna. And they chastised their wives. If you do this, you're going to lose your dharma. They're placing more stress on their varnashram than they are on the worship of Krishna. So the Yajna Patnis, the wives of those Brahmins, they ran to Krishna. Krishna smiled at them. They had some beautiful exchange. And then Krishna told them, now you go back home. And the ladies became stunned. They said, well, we can't do that. If we go back home, then our husbands, they won't accept us. And Krishna said, don't worry, I'll make everything right. So they went home. And we heard in our last session how when they returned, and those Brahmins understood all of a sudden what had taken place, that actually that boy in the woods was a Supreme Personality of Godhead, whom they had dedicated their lives to worshiping. They began to use a bad word, dik. Dik janmanaschiyadtag dig, brattam dig bahugyaktam, dik kulam, dik kriya daksham, vimukya adhoksaje. To hell with our threefold birth. They have three births. Their janma from their parents, their diksha, their dui janma, that's the meaning of being dvija, their birth at the second time of initiation, and their brota janma, or their initiation and the sacrifice. To hell with our threefold birth. To hell with our vow of celibacy. To hell with our extensive learning. To hell with our aristocratic background, our high birth. To hell with our expertise in rituals of sacrifice. They're all condemned because we were inimical to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is a obstacle for bhakti on our way to Vrindavan, to Braj Bhakti. The pastime of the Yajna Brahmins is something we have to overcome. It represents bhakti in the mode of goodness. Then the Brahmins, they began to glorify their wives. Tatascha sabarya api guru naiva manashyato. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that although they were their wives, and they're considered to be subordinate in their varnashram relationship, the Brahmins now regarded them to be their gurus. Guru naiva manashyasto. And again, in Vishwanath, in his commentary in text 42, he uses the phrase, ekasmakam guruva iti. That those Brahmins, they said, we don't longer see these ladies as subordinate to us because they're not attached. They have this wonderful quality of detachment, which we have great respect for. Because of that, ekasmakam guruva iti. They've become our gurus. And from that day on, Vishwanath says, they accepted those ladies as their gurus and no longer thought of them as their wives or property. And we spoke something in our last session about why the Brahmins didn't go to see Krishna. Because they were afraid. Kamsa bhita nacha chalan. They were afraid of Kamsa. Kamsa won't be very happy if we go there. Even though they have some faith, even though they know Shastra, even though they've accepted their wives as guru, still they can't go because they're afraid. They're not taking deep shelter. Shoka moha bhayapaha. We were speaking on this the other day. Anarthopasamam sakshat. Bhakti yoga madhoksaje. Lokashyad janato vidvams. Chakravarti samnitam. That if someone begins just hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, then there's external and internal benefit. The external benefit is that shoka moha bhayapaha. All the fear, lamentation, and illusion go away. So although these men, they were more learned than their wives, they went to the brahmacharya ashram, they were trained there, their wives didn't have that fortune. Although they've been doing sacrifice for so many years, and their wives weren't doing that, their wives were just assisting them. In so many ways, it seems that they were superior to their wives, they were inferior. Because they had an inferior quality of faith, And that came because they weren't hearing about Krishna. Whereas the ladies, they were hearing, they were regularly every day buying fruits and flowers and vegetables from some of the Palindri ladies, some of the tribal ladies of Vrindavan. And those ladies were speaking to them about the beautiful, wonderful son of Nanda Maharaj. They were hearing about Krishna. And the result of that is Shoka Moha Bhayapaha. That fear, lamentation, and illusion was destroyed. But in the case of the Yajna Brahmins, they were doing sacrifice. They were doing so many rituals. They knew Shastra. They were worshiping Krishna, although they didn't recognize Krishna. They were worshiping God. Still, they were afraid of Kamsa because they're not hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, or at least hearing properly. So then we also spoke something about how when the ladies were there before Krishna, Krishna asked them to return. And then at that time, a Vaikuntha airplane came down. And there was no Vishnu Dutas on the airplane. They were all cowherd boys, because those are the gurus of those ladies. And those ladies, the Brahma-vaivarta Purana describes, they became gopis. They bowed down before Krishna, and then they went to Goloka Vrindavan. And then at that time, the Brahma-vaivarta Purana describes, this is from the 4th canto, chapter 18 of Brahma-vaivarta Purana, text 63 describes, Harishchayam vinirmaya tasam cha Vishnu mayaya prastapayam asagrihan brahmananam swayam vibhu. Then Krishna, he employed his yoga maya potency, his Vishnu maya. And Harishchayam vinirmaya, vinirmaya means to make. He made shadow forms out of all those ladies who seemed just exactly like the ladies. They looked just exactly like them. They had all their memories, they had all their characteristics and everything, but a little difference was there. Later it's described in the same chapter. Tasham tato dikam prema kridasu sarvakarmasu dakshinyam mayaya shakta brahmana na vitartikum. They were even more affectionate, more playful, that's a nice quality for wives, and more expert in household duties than before. Still, because they were bewildered by the Lord's illusory potency, the Brahmins didn't understand. And so this discussion, which is going on between Lord Narayan and Narad Muni, the Narad Muni said, whoa. He said, who were these ladies in their previous life? What happened? And then Lord Narayan explained to him, Saptarshinam Ramanyascha Rupana Pratima Para Gunavatya Susilascha Swadharmistha Pati Brataha. He said, in their previous birth, they were married and they had really good husbands. Their husbands were the Sapta Rishis, the 7 different rishis. And those ladies were incomparably beautiful. They had all good qualities. They were Swadharmishta, very religious. Susila, they had good character. They were Gunavatya. They were very, very virtuous ladies. And they were Patibrata, very devoted to their husbands. They were following the system of Varnashram Dharma, which is especially espoused by the Sapta Rishis, who are great personalities in the mode of goodness. So one day those ladies were cooking in their homes over fires, and Agni Dev, who likes to hang out with the Sapta Rishis because they're always doing fire sacrifices, right? Agni Dev is the Lord of Fire. It's described, Dristva tasham stanasroni mukani sundarani cha analashchakame tascha madanala pidatya. That when he saw the beautiful faces, breasts, and hips of those ladies, Agni Dev became lusty and desired them. And he became tormented. Analas means by fire. He's the god of fire. But he became tormented by the fire of lusty desire. And as those ladies were cooking over the flame, his mind destroyed by lust, Krishna says in the Gita, Kamaistaistarhita jnana, that someone who's attached to whose mind is very lusty, they lose their good intelligence. So they were cooking over the fires, and then Agni Dev all of a sudden those fires became very big, the flames, and they touched the breasts and different private parts of the ladies. This is Agni Dev's way to touch the bodies of those ladies. And those chaste wives, their hearts and minds were just completely fixed on their husband's lotus feet. They were very good Dharma Patnis in the mode of goodness. They didn't understand what was happening. But Agni Dev, bewildered by lust, was staring at them and touching them again and again through the flames. When Angira Muni of the Saptarishis, he's one of the main Saptarishis, when he understood that, he cursed those ladies. And the Brahmavaivarta Purana describes, Vanescha manasam gyatva Bhagavan Angira Swayam Sasapa. Sap means a curse. Sasapatam itchivacha sarva bhaksho babuvaha. First he cursed Agni. He said, Agni, you did a very bad thing. You're harassing our wives. So because of this, now you're going to have to eat everything. And Agni Dev does. Everything. They'll have to eat everything. Because Agni's in the belly of everyone. He's in the belly of the meat eaters. So now he has to eat all kinds of nasty things. He's also there in the form of the cremation fire. He has to eat all these different bodies and that. And then Agni Dev, he had a moment, a flash. He realized, oh, I made a big mistake. And please forgive me. I'm really, really sorry. And then it's described that Angira Muni turned to those ladies. Krudo Muni. Kruda means angry. He was an angry personality. Krudo Muni para sprista kaminischa susapaha yata yuyam papa yukta manisim yonam eva cha. So then he cursed those ladies. He said, you've been touched by an outside person. So sasapaha, I give my curse on you. You papa yukta, you sinners. Manusim yonam eva cha. You sinful women, you go and you take birth as human beings. Very angry person. Now, although he's generally situated in the mode of goodness, he's a great rishi. He knows Shastra like anything. He has faith in worshiping the Lord. He's putting more stress in these external considerations of Varnashram Dharma than he is in Bhakti. And he's not even able to appreciate the faultless quality of those ladies. Some fault might be there that they were touched by another man, but it wasn't their fault. They didn't do that purposely. It happened without their desire. So he cursed them. Bharate brahmananam cha grihe labata janma vai karishyanti vivaham cha yusman na kulaja dvija. You take birth in Brahmins' homes. It wasn't such a terrible curse. At least you take birth in Brahmins' homes because you should be in the mode of goodness. And then some respectable Brahmins born in our family will marry you. Now that's interesting in this regard. The Bhagavatam describes what particular sacrifice were the Yajna Brahmins doing. They were doing the Angira Yajna. It's described in the Bhagavatam. There's no explanation given. But here in the Brahmavaivarta Purana, we can see there's a connection with Angira Muni and with those Brahmins and with those ladies. And therefore the Brahmins were doing the Angira Yajna. So those ladies, when they heard this, they began to cry. They said, this is not fair. Not chadjasman muni shrestha nispapapas chapati brata ajaniti parasprista nacha naschaktum arhati. Don't abandon us. We're sinless, we're chaste. We didn't know we were being touched by some outside person. It's not right. You should not abandon us. And Angira Muni then, he quoted Shastra. He said, no, this is not good. Parabhuktam chakantam cha yo bhunkte sa naradama sapachate kalasutre yavach chandra divakara. It described that if someone enjoys with his wife who's already been enjoyed by another man, that person is the lowest of men. And he'll have to go to hell for as long as the sun and moon shine in the sky. So how can we accept you back? You've been touched by some other person. We know Shastra. And again, he said, Nasa daive, nasa paitre, pakarha, papa samyuta, tasyas chalingane bharta, brasta shiste jasa hataha. A woman who's been enjoyed by another is not worthy to assist in sacrifices for the demigods or forefathers. Such a sinful woman is worthy only to burn in hell. And if her husband embraces her, then his power, glory, and wealth are at once destroyed. So you go take human birth. And when he saw that they were a little depressed by that, he said, anyway, you'll see Krishna. And just by seeing him, you'll go to Goloka Vrindavan. So, Srila Prabhupada, he wrote in one letter, I'd like to just meditate on this right now, to Madhusudan Prabhu in 1977. He said, we do not want all these rituals. Chanting Hare Krishna is our only business. According to the Mana Sanghita, you are all Malechas and Yavanas. You cannot touch the Mana Sanghita. What to speak of translating it? So if you try to follow the Mana Sanghita, then you'll become a Malecha and a Yavana, and your career is finished. There's many stories we often tell in this regard, how Srila Prabhupada kept things very, very simply. One will just mention, Govinda Dasi mentions that she used to cook for Srila Prabhupada, and as often happens in the Society of Devotees, there was some controversy, some disagreement. Some devotees were saying that you're not supposed to use powdered hing on Ekadasi because it has grains in it. I don't use powdered hing on Ekadasi for that reason, because it has grains in it. But at that time in America, it wasn't so easy to get other hing and whatever. So she came to Srila Prabhupada with this good question. She said, Prabhupada, is it wrong to use powdered hing on Ekadasi? Some of the devotees are saying. And when she said that to Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada became very angry. And he told her, don't introduce all these rules and regulations. He said, if you do like that, everything is going to be spoiled. Now, that doesn't mean that we should take powdered hing on Ekadasi forever and ever, because Prabhupada said, that again is the fault of not thinking clearly. This is the fault of the Yajna Brahmins. Although they're in the mode of goodness, they're not thinking deeply about what they're doing. They're just doing some external thing. They're not really understanding the purpose of things. So it's not that the rule that was followed in 1968 is a rule that we should also follow in 2020. We should understand, but we should understand the spirit of Srila Prabhupada. Not putting the rules first, but putting bhakti first. And this is the problem in this pastime, that these Brahmins are putting the rules before their wives. And they're quoting Shastra, and what they're saying is correct from Shastra, that if another man has touched this woman and someone then accepts her as wife, then that person will go to hell. He can never accept such a wife. And such a woman can never do any sacrifice or anything. Shastra says like that. But that is smarta vichar. That's the consideration of the smartas. It's not Goswami vichar, the consideration of our Goswamis. Srila Prabhupada in one letter, he said, according to smarta vichar, when a woman, it's her time of the month when she's off the altar, she can't perform worship. But according to Goswami vichar, she can. He said, but better that you don't. If there's some other circumstance, some other possibility is there, better that you don't. But for the smartas, they couldn't even consider such a thing. It's inconceivable. And even we see many of the Vaishnavas today in Vrindavan, in Jagannath Puri, and Navadvip, they couldn't even consider such a thing. Because many of them are practicing sattvika bhakti, bhakti in the mode of goodness, and they're putting these rules and regulations in their varnashram before bhakti, and they don't understand it. And therefore sometimes even they abuse devotees in the forms of their wives. They think, oh, I'm superior to you, because according to Varnashram Dharma, the wife should be submissive to the husband. But they don't understand, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati described in one article we were citing a few days ago, that a Vaishnav marriage is not the same as a Vedic marriage. We're following a higher thing. In a Vaishnav marriage, it's not that the wife is a servant of the husband, or the husband is a servant of the wife, or the husband is better, or the wife is better. But they're a Vaishnav. How can a Vaishnav accept another Vaishnav as a servant? Rather, he said, they serve each other for the pleasure of Guru and Krishna. That's Vaishnav marriage. And according to the social system, the wife may act in a subordinate, humble way to the husband, or the husband may act in a subordinate, humble way to the wife, as we're seeing in this part of the pastime, that the Brahmins accepted their wives as their gurus. When they came to their senses and understood that bhakti is the most important thing, then they abandoned these secondary considerations, or guna britti, and they adopted the mukhya britti, the most important consideration of bhakti. And the ironic thing is that, as described in the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, those ladies, they went to Krishna. They didn't have to go back. But their shadow forms went back. And the amazing thing is, it was those shadow forms of the ladies which gave perfection to the yajnas of their husbands. Even the shadow of bhakti gives success in fruitive activities. When the shadow of those pure devotees, those pure ladies came and were assisting their husbands, that was what gave all success to them. It wasn't their chanting of mantras or their high birth or their this or that. It was because they had some connection with those ladies, and therefore Vishwanath says they accepted them as their guru. So we'll stop there. This is some description given about bhakti and the mode of goodness, and how it's sagun. It's under the modes of material nature, and how we should go beyond that. So I'd like to finish this topic today. We're going to go on to text 11 and 12 in our next session on Friday. So I encourage everybody to come if you're interested in that. We're going to hear about nirguna bhakti, a bhakti which is free from the modes of nature. And Ramana Sukha Prabhu, my revered Guru Jana, my uncle in spiritual life, makes some question. He's saying, is following rules and regulations and rituals without full appreciation of the bhakti principles a form of niyamagraha? So yes, in answer to your question, the simple answer is yes. Niyamagraha, there's two words here, niyamagraha and niyamagraha. Niyamagraha means that someone puts too much stress on the rules and regulations. And Rupa Goswami says that this is something which will destroy bhakti. So we should be very, very careful about that. I want to see if anybody has any reflections or comments. We have to finish quite soon this morning because we all have something to do. Does anybody have any reflection or comment here? Satchitananda Prabhu?
Maybe if you can just clarify or explain a little bit more, how is it that a bhakta can be more...
He's asking if we can say something about how a bhakta can be more elevated than a temple president, or maybe even, honestly, even than a sannyasi, or even than a GBC, maybe even than a guru.
Time, that can be proven in time. But in the meantime, how can someone detect that?
Well, there's two things. There's Lokik etiquette, there's mundane etiquette, and there's bhakti etiquette. And we should always follow both. We give respect to the temple president. We give more respect to him socially than we do to the new bhakta. Because if someone who's dedicated their life to Prabhupada's mission, they're a senior devotee, and this other person's just a young devotee. So we should give more respect to that. But at the same time, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his Chaitanya Siksamrita, he gives 8 different causes for respect, and that's a whole class in and of itself, and sometimes we speak about that. Beginning with Nara Matra Maryada, or anybody who's a human being, we should give respect to him. And he goes on, Raja Maryadas, we give more respect to someone who has a position. But even more respect we give to Vidya Maryada, someone who has knowledge, but even more respect to Sadguna Maryada, someone who has good qualities. And he goes all the way up. So someone who has good qualities, we give more respect to, even than someone who's a leader. If the leader doesn't have good qualities, we should give respect to him. Bhaktivinoda says that. More respect than just an ordinary human being. We give respect to Raja Maryada. An example is given in Chaitanya Charitamrita and Madhya Lila of Sanatana Goswami, who wasn't going to work with the Nawab Hussain Shah because he was hearing Bhagavatam with a bunch of Hare Krishna people. And the Nawab finally came to see what was going on. And when he arrived in that assembly of Vaishnava Brahmins, they all stood up to give respect to him. Why? Because he's eaten more hamburgers than everybody else? He's a bigger demon? No, because he has some position. And they give respect to that position. But they didn't go with him. They stayed with Sanatana Goswami. But they gave respect to him. So that's an example of some external form of respect. But the highest type of respect, Bhaktivinoda says, first there's Varna Maryada. We give respect to the Varna, someone who, especially who's a Brahmin. And the Brahmin is characterized by someone who has knowledge. So we give more respect to knowledge. And then we give more respect than that to Ashram Maryada, to someone who's a brahmachari. Then someone, the topmost respect we give an Ashram Maryada is to someone who is a sannyasi. But Bhaktivinoda says the eighth and highest, last limit of respect, most important, is Bhakti Maryada. We give the most respect to someone who has bhakti. An example given there is in Hari Bhakti Surudoya of Parashara Muni. When he was 7 years old, he went to the assembly of the Sapta Rishis, and Markandeya Rishi was heading that. Markandeya Rishi was 7 kalpas old. And he was in charge of all those rishis. He was the big cheese, right? He was like the temple president in that assembly. But when that little boy who was 7 years old came in the assembly, Markandeya Rishi stood up and gave more respect to the little boy than to all those senior rishis. And it created a disturbance. Parashara Muni, the author who later wrote Vishnu Purana. So why did he do that? And you could probably see in everybody's face confusion. Why are you giving more respect to this little boy? Here I'm senior to that little boy. I know more Shastra. I've been here, so I'm much, much older than him. And you're 7 kalpas old. Why are you getting up and giving respect to him? And you didn't get up and give respect to all of us. This is not good. And Markandeya Rishi, understanding their confusion, he said, which is more senior? And we'll give him, he didn't say sequoia tree, but we'll give that example. 1,000-year-old sequoia tree or a 2-day-old tulsi plant. Who is more senior? The tulsi plant is more senior. We give more respect to Tulsi Devi. So he said, so similarly, how do we judge age and seniority? He says we judge by how long the person has thought of Krishna. And this little boy, although he's only 7 years old, in those 7 years has thought more about Krishna than all of us put together. And I'm over 7 kalpas old. So he's more worthy of respect. And if we have a society that understands that, and this necessarily gives respect to the temple president and the GBC and the sannyasis from the heart, but gives most respect to bhakti. Even if it may be in a small child, a new bhakta, in a Mataji housewife, or wherever we find bhakti, we give the most respect to that. Leela Avatar Mataji's commented, in the late 70s and early 80s, deity worship was so simple. Now there's more mantras and less time for the dressing of the lords. Yeah, that's a big topic. Yeah, Prabhupada didn't like that. Prabhupada wanted to keep everything very, very simple. We should focus on the holy name. That's why personally in our ashram we like to have our worship of Giriraj. And Prabhupada told Lakshmi Moni Mataji that worship should take you no more than 20 minutes. We do a very simple thing, and we focus more on hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and chanting Hare Krishna. But sometimes devotees, they have more inspiration in deity worship, and in the big temple they want to see that going on. I won't say anything more. Okay, so anybody else, you have anything on a point? Okay, come here, take the mic. Anupayani Rad has comments.
Thank you so much. I didn't hear the story of this Brahmana's wife's previous life. I didn't hear it before. And for me, that I was thinking about that how these husbands, they change their attitude completely towards their wives. And if you just imagine this, it's really inconceivable. Like, because they are Brahmins and they consider them really Brahmins and they're just my wives, and they completely change their ego. I mean, their appreciation of their wives and Krishna's mercy completely changed their ego. And this is really interesting to think, like really close to us, because I have a particular ego, I have a particular consideration who I am, who other people to how they related to me and my attitude to them. And this is really difficult to change this sometimes, especially with the relatives and things. And this is just amazing how Bhakti is working, and just like just wondering.
So, nice comment, thank you. Yes, so this is the activity of bhakti, because they had some connection with those wives, and their wives were very great devotees. They had some benefit, but the benefit wasn't just because their wives were great devotees. Think about it. The wives were already great devotees before Krishna sent the boys there. So what's the difference? The difference is when the husbands recognized their wives and they gave proper respect to them. So we may associate with a devotee. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada, he's on a train or a plane or something, and someone's sitting right next to him and may even talk to him or something. But if they don't appreciate the position of that person, they don't respect that person, they'll get some benefit, but it's not the same benefit. It's very important that we should learn to respect the devotees. Ronak Prabhu's commented, are there other examples in the Shastras that demonstrate this principle of bhakti being more important than rules and regulations? A few examples that come to my mind. One is that in Ram Leela, Lord Ramachandra, he performed the Shrad ceremony for Jatayu. And that's unheard of because he's coming from a very high-class Kshatriya family. He's a king. And Jatayu was a vulture, a non-vegetarian bird that eats dead bodies. And Lord Ramachandra is performing his Shrad ceremony. Similarly, there's respect being given to the monkeys. Many different examples are there. Let me think of something else. Oh, Lord Brahma. How Lord Brahma, he was very attached to his position. And we mentioned this as someone in the mode of goodness. And he's thinking about rules and regulations. But he was defeated by Krishna and by the residents of Vrindavan, the cowherd boys, and even the cows defeated him by their bhakti, in that Krishna stuck up for them. Krishna manifested their forms and showed, these are my people. And he didn't do the same thing for Lord Brahma, even though Lord Brahma he's Karta, he's the personality who's the doer of everything. So we're going to stop there because we're a little late today and we have some things going on. So we'll be back on Friday, same time, and we're going to discuss something about bhakti, transcendental bhakti or nirguna bhakti. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.